We have got Professor Khawar Hameed with us today. The title of his presentation is Decoding Digital, the DNA of Future Education. So if you've got any questions that you want to put to Khawar that we'll put to him after this, put them in the chat. And then after this, we'll be hosting presentations from some wonderful guys at Google and at JISC, looking around these ideas of digital, decoding that and safeguarding as well. So, without further ado, we are pleased to be joined by Professor Khawar Hameed.
Okay, thank you very much, EduFuturist team, and hello to all the delegates out there from around the world, in fact. I'll start off with the obligatory question. Can you hear me and can you see me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay, so first of all, I'm very pleased to be here with you, in fact, today. I think this is a very, very timely conference. So I certainly commend the organizer, C-Learning, EduFuturist, and WCG. Now, just reflecting on my phraseology, it's good to be here with you. Am I really here with you? You know, you're there, I'm here. And actually, this is the thrust of my presentation. It's about telepresence, so projecting presence from afar and in context of teaching, learning, and the infrastructural entity of education. So hopefully, you know, this will take around 15 to 20 minutes, and I'm sure the EduFuturist teams will give me the signal as and when needed. So my talk is about decoding digital and the DNA of future education. So there's four elements I'll be talking through. One is change. So the last 3 months I've seen a real systemic change on an unprecedented scale. I'll be giving some definitions of digital. These are not technical definitions. You know, these are more broader because digital diffuses and permeates through entire ecosystems and sectors. It's not just about the technology. In fact, the human-centric element emerges as one of the crucial aspects of digital in the future. I'll be framing this through decoding digital. What does it really mean beyond the technology? And I'll be talking about this in an educational context. And then finally, I'll be looking at how do we frame this or rethink and reframe digital and learning for future education. And this is a very exciting area. It's where we can all contribute. And I can see from some of the comments this morning about co-creation, the community of practice and working together. And we have a brilliant window of opportunity for doing that. Okay, so unprecedented change, and I think we can use the word unprecedented. If we reflect on the evolution of education, then we've not really seen change like this before. So literally, in a matter of days, we've seen really the flick of a switch where we've seen the alteration of the state. The state of what? Well, the state of education as an institute at a macro level, but also alteration of how people function at an individual level. So it spans the spectrum of engagement. The process of alteration is still happening. In fact, it hasn't completed and it won't complete. So this is a fundamental move from how we normally engage in the process of education and how we are now factoring in telepresence as an integral element of delivery. So this is all about systemic adaptation and stability. And we haven't reached that point of stability. And it's in response to shock, just like environmental shock, like hurricanes, earthquakes, disasters, and the impact of war. So shock is a term which is used there. And actually what we've seen is the impact of the COVID-19 shock. And the adaptation and the stability is, in this case, to do with the educational infrastructure, the technology which is being deployed in response to that shock. You know, we've all suddenly gone online. We've all become digital savvy, or we are trying to become digital savvy. And of course, the impact on the human-centric element, the learners out there. Now, we're known for being agile in education, aren't we? I'll just pause there for you to think. Yeah, tongue-in-cheek question. So actually, we're not that agile, realistically speaking. It can take days, weeks, months, and years. In fact, if you look at how we architecture the learning process, and quinquennial reviews, for example, in universities, they happen only every 5 years. Isn't that amazing? We've suddenly switched like the flick of a switch, and we've had a rapid response. This demonstrates two things. First and foremost, we can do it. Secondly, why haven't we done it before? Well, actually, my view is this change was going to happen anyway. COVID has just brought it forward quite rapidly. And if we look at the evolution of educational technology and how we've embedded this, the writing was on the wall. And the evolution started many, many years ago, 2 or 3 decades ago, in fact, regarding technology integration. Now, a couple of visuals here. The first visual with the crayons up to the chatbot on the right-hand side. We have a continuum of educational technology intervention. I couldn't resist putting an image of an OHP in here. Can you and raise your hand if you remember OHPs? This now defunct technology, I hope, which you find lying underneath desks. So if you sat underneath a desk, you know, or you go into an office and your foot hits something, it's probably one of those. But actually, my journey in education started in the very early 90s, about 91, and we used chalk and board, and we had these monstrous machines called OHPs, and the acetates or the slides we used to write on. So that actually is a form of really, really primitive educational technology. On the other end of the spectrum now, we're seeing AI and chatbots intelligently acting as agents in the end-to-end delivery of education. Now, the question that might be going through your mind is, okay, so what will happen to the educator if we have intelligent agents as an intervening agency? We went through the phase of VLEs, and it's around that time we started to see more systemic coordination, or an attempt for systemic coordination in education. And again, I think originally the use of VLEs was nothing more than a repository for information rather than dynamic interaction with the learner as part of a altered dynamic learning process. Now, there's many, many different forms of technologies I could have included here, but that's the continuum. So whether it's VR, MR, merged realities, whether it's smartphones, smart tablets, the spectrum's out there. Now, the second diagram here is also equally important, because in the early days of technology intervention, typically we had champions in institutions with point-specific intervention. So a bright spark who perhaps wanted to do something, but was doing that in isolation. So it wasn't organization-wide. So we have innovators here who have always been in education and have tried to force change in education organically. On the right-hand side of this continuum, we then have transformative impact, which is from the top down. It's organization-wide, and in this case, the concept and the practice of digital runs deep throughout the entire organization, affecting culture and practice and the end-to-end engineering and delivery of education. So actually, change is the constant. We have a continuum. It will continue. And as educators, the challenge we have always faced is the extent to which we accommodate this change effectively in the delivery of education to achieve effective learning outcomes. And that's really crucial, learning outcomes. Okay, so what do we mean by digital? Well, there are lots and lots of technical definitions of digital, and I'm not going to talk about those. The way I describe digital, it's a force, it's a transformative and mainly positive force, which permeates through all aspects of life, personal, social, commercial. We don't go through any day without interaction with digital in some shape or form. So it's here, it's going to stay, and the diffusion will become deeper. And it yields all different forms of ecosystems, supply chains, value chains, new products and services, service innovations as a result, and growth opportunities, and also opportunities for cross-sector collaboration. Now, all of this is directly applicable to the business of education. So we can adopt all of the values or the affordance of digital to start to alter the state of education, future-proof it even in the hyper-connected digital future. And crucially, it changes human infrastructure engagement. And the evidence is facing us right now. Your students are not on campus, they're not on site. So fundamentally, the alteration of their engagement with the infrastructure is extremely clear. Okay, so when we talk about digital, we have a number of core technologies which are driving the engine. And again, each one of these is probably the subject of at least 1 hour's worth of a talk. But 5G, for example, enables low latency, high speed connections in the environment around us. So how can that be used in future learning? Because we learn from the environment around us. The learner can be connected anytime, any place. We've got the principle of and practice of cloud computing, which allows access to data, again, anytime, any place. And we've got the aspect of AI, which is creeping in education in quite significant ways as well. And of course, the data, and data is crucial here. But in order to generate the data, you have to have some form of codification of the learning process. And that's important because how will we measure learning in the future? I'll say a little bit more about KPIs, student satisfaction surveys, etc., and league tables in a few minutes. But we have to think about codification and measuring value. Okay, so I'm now going to introduce you to my niece, in fact, and this video was taken when she was 2 years old. So turn your volume up, and it's a 10-second video clip. And I want you to listen carefully to what Amila is saying, because Amila is your student tomorrow. Okay. Okay, I hope you all heard that. So that might have seemed like a novelty. We've got Amila, 2.5 years old, clearly trying to talk to Alexa. But here's the thing. We've got a human being who's yet incapable of engaging in human language, yet she's trying to engage with a device. And that's quite deep, actually, because by the time she's 16 or 18 or 21, a young adult, what language will she be speaking? And I don't just mean in literal textual terms on the elements of the language. I mean the infrastructural aspects of the language. What will she be talking with? What kind of devices? Will it be you? Will it be agents acting on your behalf as educators? So interaction is absolutely crucial here. We are interacting through screens at the moment and keyboards and other forms of devices which enable virtual presence. Crucially, what will she know? So we have this ecosystem, this ether of digital around us, and we have the student at the center, absorbing lots and lots of information, filtering all of this information. So what will she know? Because we all work in the knowledge economy. That's why we are educators. And crucially, what 21st century competencies will she actually have? Now, we hear about digital skills, but actually digital skills are part of capability and competencies. So the World Economic Forum, for example, has talked about 21st century skills, curiosity, inquisition, that kind of thing, because that's what will be important in the future. So digital provides an alteration of learning. So the question is, what do we now have to convey in terms of capability through that new digital ecosystem? Also, how will she be work ready? Now, why do we educate? It's because we want to produce work ready graduates. So how will she be work ready and employable if the language is changing, the interaction with the educational system is changing, and what kind of career will she be going into? And we do hear about future jobs. That's actually quite true. So it's a responsibility of educators to take a step back and understand the competencies which are needed in that hyper-connected future. So my question is, what role will you play in Amila's education? How will your process of education be re-architected so it's fit for purpose for that student? Now, tomorrow is closer than you think. I took this photograph probably 4 years ago, And these were my students waiting for a class. So I was late, they were there before me, very keen students. And look at them, heads down. What are they actually doing? And interestingly, they're in a place of learning, but they're probably not learning right now. They're probably doing other things. So let's reverse that concept. Let's take them out of the learning place, so out of the institution. That probably means they can access learning content. So it's a simple reverse of logic there. And actually we see that. We see learning beyond place, beyond infrastructure, yet we see the retention of engagement with the learning process. I know you won't be able to see the details on this visual, but this is called the conversation prism. So when they're looking at screens, actually what they're engaging in is a whole range of conversations and systems and agents and entities and data and information which they're absorbing. That's a good thing and it's a bad thing. It's a double-edged sword in terms of assimilation and assimilation of the right kind of knowledge, skills, and capability. So are you part of that? Because if education will be through screens and it goes beyond the borders of the infrastructure, then that has to be accommodated. So on that point, I just want to talk about decoding digital and what that means in real terms beyond technology. So the visual on the right, something which looks like a polo, you know, the sweets polo with the blue dots in there. This represents the physical construct of education. It's the institution, it's the bricks and mortar. And this has a spatial pull. This is why students go to college, they go to university, go being the operative word here. And this starts and it happens right from application, right from where students choose which college or university they want to go to. So there's a gravitational pull and a magnetism to the campus. And what goes with that are flows. So we have flows which go to that particular space. The blue dots, by the way, represent the elements or the entities which make the educational system work. So what we have here then is a spatial context which literally exists in real forms and students go to college and university. We have a temporal context, which means things happen at a particular time. It's not a coincidence that students arrive for class at 9 AM on a Monday morning. That's engineered. It's a synchronization of what we call clock time. It's clock time because we all understand it. This is why we are all here right now at clock time. So we have this concept and practice of space and time, so spatial and temporal, and this gives us the composite of the dynamics of learning. This is the magic we see happen on campus. This is the magic of learning. It all happens on site. And ownership and control is important here because think about who owns the time, who owns the space, who owns the process of learning. I'm very quickly going to flick that now. So I've altered the diagram. Notice now the gray concentric circle is blank. There's nothing in it. The blue dots, which represent the elements of learning, so everything which happens in the learning process no longer exists in that one space. They are projected outwards. So we have this orange concentric circle now, which is the digital ether. And there's lots of interesting issues that can be discussed here. So we have the outward projection, but the spatial and the temporal context is fundamentally altered. Students are no longer going to university or college. Actually, learning is coming to them. So we have the digital ether, the channel through which learning content is now being distributed. What happens to the composite dynamics though? You know, the magic which happens on campus. Where does that magic happen now? So the human-centric aspect, the cultural elements, the behavioral aspects, can they exist in an altered form? And that's a debate which I think the educational community needs to have. Ownership and control fundamentally changes because you no longer own the time. Students can choose when they want to learn. So we go from clock time to qualitative time and the trade-off between units of time. So by being here today, it's highly likely you've actually traded a unit of time. You maybe have put something on the shelf and you'll come back to that in order to be here. That doesn't happen on campus. Classes exist at a particular time, you have to be there. So control changes fundamentally. So an entire rethinking and a reframing is needed of education. Okay, about 3 more visuals and we're done, just to assure the EduFuturist team who are working behind the scenes there. So the DNA of future education, the digital DNA, there's a number of aspects. Each one of these is a talk in itself, but we have the spatial and temporal concept, how we alter the infrastructural elements of education, the external insights of the technology. Again, that goes back to communications, AI, data, the core engine. We have to bring pedagogy into the equation. So that might be externally driven, so GIST Digital and some of the brilliant work which they're doing. There may be institutional learning and teaching styles or pedagogies. And we've got the elements on the right, which are the pragmatics, and leadership is absolutely crucial. Leadership and vision will drive the agenda forward. It has to. It has to be a coordinated approach. And the green in the middle is where it all comes together. This is where we harmonize. And I call this the affordance of digital. It's about access and accessibility, efficiency, flexibility, connectedness, the principle of being connected, not just in technical terms, but in that orange concentric circle, in digital social terms. It's about ownership, productivity. It's all about learning. Okay, so what do you re-architect? There's many different dimensions here. So on this visual, I've included pedagogy and student experience, which is quite broad. But where are you on this spectrum? What do you want to re-architect in context of digital? We have oceans of red and oceans of blue. So the red represents what most colleges are doing. It's saturated. And this diagram was produced about 9 years ago by some work undertaken by Plymouth and Teesside. It's congested space. Now, I've added a green circle there called digital, and this is open space. It's blue oceans, they're clear. So who's going to be first to market in terms of capitalizing effective digital delivery of education? Because there are competitive forces there. There's around 165 universities in the UK, around 300 colleges, I believe. So we have to re-engineer another form of gravitational force. You probably want to be in the top right quadrant here, digerati or winners, those who have cracked the puzzle, those who have produced a solution, and those who are ahead of the field in their digital delivery. Where you don't want to be is the bottom left of this quadrant, the laggards or the losers, who didn't pivot. That's the term we're using. So my 2 diagrams actually are about pivoting. So those who didn't adapt and adapt in an agile way. You could in the future superimpose things like national student surveys, NSS and other league table type data on this diagram, and understanding the relationship of impact is actually going to be fertile ground. So how do the digerati improve their outputs in terms of those facts and stats? Okay, so I've speeded up a little bit there, conscious of time. So summary thoughts. To what extent are we traditionalists? Paradox, I'm here at the EduFuturists events. You're a part of that community, but I'm asking you, to what extent are we really traditionalists in education? How can we embrace change? And as a community of practice, it's actually our responsibility to drive that sector forward. It's a push-pull relationship between technology, human-centric forces, and the business of education. But actually, it's our business and it's our responsibility to drive this forward. We're actually looking through a very, very unique window of opportunity. This is unprecedented. We've not seen this before in education, and we need to react. I think it will be interesting in 12 months' time from now, how the assimilation of what's being learned right now will be captured and presented in the future. Maybe another EduFuturist event in 12 months' time. Now, disruptive change is going to happen. But here's the thing, it's going to move away from learning by attendance to attendant-supported learning, and attendance is a fundamentally different term. It means there will be elements which attend to the needs of the learner wherever that learner is. And that's where the crucial aspect of digital comes into play. And we can't avoid this because there is a democratization of digital. It's out there. We can't control this. The only thing we can do as educationalists is understand and fit in. Okay, so on that note, I'd like to thank you for being here with me today, and hope you've enjoyed the talk, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much. And I found that really interesting because I always love to know the mechanics behind why are we doing what we're doing. And I think that you unpack some of that really well. We've got a couple of questions, and so I'd just like to go through them. The first question that we had was from the family learning tutor, and I just asked anyway. Family learning tutor. Many community-based providers still do not have access to technology. Therefore, rely on whiteboard or other, or technology access is brought in by tutors. How do we manage to kind of upscale some of the things that you're talking about so that everyone has access to it?
Yeah, I mean, this is a common question, and I think it's sad that we still have this fundamental digital divide, and I think we need to reflect on that landscape. You know, we are a highly developed nation. There are highly developed nations in across the globe. There's been this huge push for communications infrastructure and digital, yet we still have effectively off-grid communities who are on the other side of that digital divide. I think my view here, and I think some reference was made to this elsewhere today, I think we have to come together as a community of educationalists. So universities with further education colleges, but going beyond that, I think we also then have to bring into the equation external agents from the commercial sector. And there's lots of motivating factors for all of these agents. It's a win-win situation where we have the creation of mutual value. It's all about co-creation. And I think, you know, the comment was made, education is a fundamental right. It absolutely is. And I think that's how we need to see education. And it's about social mobility. It's about generating the architects of the future. I think it's a very sad reflection that we have this digital divide.
Agreed. Dr. Peter Shuki, just from down the road from us, has put a really great point in as well, which it's a little bit earlier than this one, I think. He talked about the rhizomatic, and I love that idea of what that means and how that explains. But it says the rhizomatic does not mean no colleges, but different colleges. How we organise and where things happen can be exciting if we allow the input and dialogue of our diverse communities with educators.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, there are techno-political forces at play here, because fundamentally the building of infrastructure provides enabling capability. Without the infrastructure, you can't have distributed offline remote learning. Where investment in infrastructure occurs is a political question. Unfortunately, we're on the receiving end. So I think lobbying is important here. Understanding the power of digital, the power of learning, but then undertaking lobbying to make it inclusive.
And the next question is kind of in the same vein from Liz Pemberton. Hi, Liz. She says she's an early years consultant and educator. How important do you think it is to ensure that children from racially marginalised groups have their teaching and learning adapted?
Yeah, very good question. I think learning and teaching has to be equitable first and foremost. You know, there has to be an even landscape there for all players to engage with. The adaptation, I think, occurs at two different levels. One is the pedagogic adaptation of learning content. Now, this is something that we all engage in. But I think when you start to bring into it elements of harmonizing content, which can be delivered across societies effectively, then I think, you know, other questions of inclusion have to be addressed here in terms of content creation. It's a tough one. I think it's about education of the educators. It's about being sensitive. It's about bringing on board perhaps systemic alteration, and that becomes an embedded component in the creation and the delivery of content. We can't leave it to chance. I've seen things being left to chance. And I think we're at a brilliant stage here where we can harmonize. I won't use the word control, but we can harmonize and we can influence. And I think this is part of the re-architecting, and that's the sensitivities of the content that we create. Safe content, appropriate content, globalized content. And that's absolutely crucial because, you know, I noticed today we've got people from around the world. You know, this is a global event, and we have to factor in the deeper aspects of globalization and community engagement.
Yeah, agreed. And one of our guests from the panel, the earlier panel on pedagogy, has asked a great question. Stephen Spence, he said, "This is a fantastic talk. We agree. It was wonderful. There was so much insight. It's one of those that I think we're going to have to listen to again and again and again to learn from." He says his question is to follow up on the social aspects that you alluded to. It's come through our student feedback. How do we replicate the social aspects online?
Brilliant question. Thanks for that, Stephen. I don't think you can replicate them. I think in replicating them, you're trying to combine two fundamentally polar opposing things, for want of a better word. We're humans, you know, we're analog, we're emotionally rational, all of that kind of stuff. You know, this is what makes us people. On the other hand, digital is actually underpinned by the finite state machine. We are not machines. So I think the question, can we replicate, is probably reframed perhaps in how can we create a new form of engagement, social engagement. And I don't think there is one particular solution to this question. I think we can learn a lot, by the way, from the digital social community out there. I mean, if you look at the usage of social media platforms, actually, they're really, really good at creating communities. You see, going back to that traditionalist perspective, how do we create communities on campus? We get them together. We have freshers weeks or freshers events. We have clubs and we have societies. Now, physically, you can't replicate that in a digital ether because it's all virtual. So this now goes back to what are the principles that we're trying to manifest: the principle of communication, the principle of relationships, the principle of dialogue, the principle of culture, the principle of the sense of being there. So I think if we focus on the principles, we can be very, very innovative in employing the technology to manifest those principles.
Can I just jump in before you go in, Janelle? There's another thing that's just come up really quickly, and I know that we haven't picked this one up. There's a great quote, comment that's coming from our good friend Patrick McGrath from Text Help, just coming at 12:35, and he said, "Universal design for learning has to be front and center going forward. Equity of access is not just about technology. It's about access to learning." And I know that the great work that Text Help do around accessibility and the tools for everybody accessing learning isn't just about technology, is it? And I think that was evident from what you talked about as well, Professor Khawar.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, again, it's all about equitable access, and access can mean different things. So yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I'm totally on board with that.